My daughter's fiancé demanded $50,000 or no wedding. Instead, I froze his account at my bank. The request came in a text message, cold and direct, like a business order. I, Roberto, who had built my entire life on trust and hard work, felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. It wasn't about the money. It was because of the audacity, the blatant betrayal of my daughter Anna's love. That boy Daniel, whom I had welcomed into my home, who sat at my table and smiled as if he were family, was a freeloader. My first reaction was a tremor of rage, a hot wave that rose through my chest. I could have called, yelled, exposed him right then and there. But revenge, I learned long ago, is a dish best served cold. With a few phone calls, Daniel's account at my bank, an account I myself had helped him open as a gesture of welcome to the family, became a digital ice block. Nothing came in, nothing went out. That was just the beginning. My daughter's fiancé demanded $50,000, so I froze his account at my bank. I want you to find out the revenge I planned for Daniel. Subscribe and leave your like. My daughter, Anna, came home that night crying. Daniel had called her desperate, saying that the bank had made a terrible mistake, that he couldn't access his money. He convinced her that it was a technical problem, and she, with her pure heart, believed him. She asked me for help, her eyes red and her voice trembling. "Dad, can you call the manager? Daniel is so worried." Looking at her and lying was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I said I would take care of it, that I would check what was going on. Inside, my heart was breaking for her, but my determination grew stronger. I needed to protect her from him, even if, for a while, she hated me for it. That night, I hired a private investigator named Marco, a discreet and efficient man I had known for years. The instruction was simple: find out everything about Daniel, every friend, every debt, every secret. The following days were silent torture. Daniel began to show his true colors, little by little. The frustration of not having access to money made him irritable and impatient with Anna. He blamed her, suggesting that maybe my bank wasn't so good after all, planting seeds of doubt in her mind about me and my work. Anna defended me, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. She was caught between the man she loved and the father who had always protected her. I stood my ground, acting as if I were trying to solve the problem at the bank, while Marco sent me daily updates, and the findings were worse than I had imagined. Daniel wasn't just a greedy young man. He was a professional. There were other women, other families, other broken promises of marriage when the money didn't come through. He lived off scams, using his charm to find wealthy families and extract what he could before disappearing. The story he told us was a complete fabrication. His parents weren't retired diplomats living abroad. They were simple people who lived in a small town a few hours away and hadn't heard from their son in almost 5 years. They thought Daniel was working for a large technology company. Marco got the contact information for one of his previous victims, a young woman named Julia. She told me on the phone, her voice full of shame and pain, how Daniel had convinced her to give him a large sum of money for an investment that never existed. When she asked for her money back, he disappeared, leaving her heartbroken and with a huge debt. Every word Julia said was like a nail in the coffin of the image Daniel had built. I recorded the conversation. With her permission, I had everything I needed. The trap was ready to be set. I organized a dinner party at my house. I told Anna that it was to officially celebrate their engagement and that I had good news about Daniel's account. She was thrilled, thinking that everything had been resolved. She invited Daniel, who accepted right away, probably thinking that his plan had worked and that the money would finally be released. He arrived smiling, bringing flowers for Anna and a bottle of wine for me. His cynicism was nauseating. We sat down at the table, and I let him talk about his grand plans for the future, about how he and Anna would travel the world. He was a talented actor, I must admit. My daughter looked at him with pure adoration, and my stomach churned. I waited for dessert to be served. Then I cleared my throat and said as calmly as I could, "Daniel, I have a surprise for you." His smile widened. Anna looked at me, full of expectation. I placed a small tape recorder on the table, between the pie plates. "Before I give you my good news, I'd like you to hear something." I pressed play. Julia's voice filled the silence in the dining room, recounting in detail how Daniel had deceived her, how he had used the same phrases and promises he made to Anna. Daniel's face went from a confident tan to a pale white. He tried to say it was a lie, a setup. Anna looked at him, then at me, completely lost. "Dad, what is this?" she whispered, her eyes filled with tears. I didn't answer. Instead, I slid an envelope across the table to Daniel. "Here are copies of Julia's bank transfers to you, and also the address of your real parents. I think they'd love to know you're getting married." Daniel's mask fell completely. The charm dissolved, revealing an ugly, desperate fear. He jumped up, knocking over his chair. "You can't do this," he shouted. I didn't do anything. His voice was high-pitched, almost a hiss. Anna began to cry for real, a cry of pain and understanding. The truth, harsh and cruel, was right in front of her. "Daniel, is it true?" she asked, her voice broken. He couldn't answer. He just looked at me with pure hatred. "You ruined everything," he hissed. "No," I replied, standing up too. "You did that yourself." I just turned on the light so my daughter could see the monster she was about to marry. He said nothing more. He grabbed his coat and slammed the door, disappearing into the night and out of our lives. lives forever. The room fell silent, filled only with Anna's sobs. I approached her and hugged her tightly. She cried on my shoulder for a long time. There was no "I told you so" or any words of reproach from me. There was only her pain, which was also mine. That night she didn't thank me. She was too hurt, too humiliated. The following weeks were difficult. Anna barely spoke to me. She was mourning, not for Daniel, but for the life she thought she would have. I gave her space, knowing that healing would take time. His account remained frozen. Eventually, the tax authorities were notified of his suspicious activities, and I learned from Marco that he had much bigger problems to deal with than a broken engagement. My revenge was silent but complete. I didn't just destroy his engagement, I dismantled the life of lies he had built. A month later, on a Sunday afternoon, Anna came to my office. She sat in the chair across from me and said, her voice still fragile but clear, "Thank you, Dad, for protecting me, even from myself." At that moment, I knew that despite all the pain, I had done the right thing. Family was everything, and I would do anything to protect mine. That thank you from my daughter was like the first rain after a long drought. It didn't solve everything at once, but it gave hope to the cracked soil of our relationship. I just nodded my head, a gesture that tried to say I'm here without needing more words. In the months that followed, the house returned to a routine, but it was a different, more careful routine. Anna's laughter took a while to return completely. At first, it came in small bursts, almost like a whisper when we watched a movie or commented on some silly news story. I learned to cherish each of those moments as if they were treasures. She threw herself into her work with fierce dedication, as if she wanted to build a wall of projects and spreadsheets around her wounded heart. I understood. It was her way of healing, of proving to herself that her life was not defined by a man who had deceived her. I stopped trying to solve her problems and just started being there for her. Sometimes I would just make her coffee and leave it on her desk without saying anything. It was a new kind of language between us, made up of small gestures and comfortable silence. The trust that had been shaken, not by Daniel, but by my lie to protect her, was being rebuilt, brick by brick. About 2 months after the disastrous dinner, Marco called me. His voice was professional, as always, but I could detect a tone of satisfaction. "I have news about our friend," he said. "It seems that your plan was the domino that knocked down all the others." Marco told me that with his account frozen and the tax authorities investigating, Daniel had become an easy target. Other victims, including Julia, felt safe to file formal complaints. His story about being a successful investor collapsed publicly. He was not a lone wolf. He was part of a small but efficient network of scammers who exchanged information about potential targets. His downfall led to the discovery of his accomplices. He was facing serious charges, and bail had been denied. "He won't be bothering anyone else for a long time, Roberto," Marco concluded. I felt immense relief, a weight lifting off my shoulders. Justice was taking its course, and my daughter was safe. I hung up the phone and looked out the window of my office. The world seemed a little brighter. The revenge had been cold, precise, and, most importantly, it had worked to protect the one I loved most. I felt no joy at Daniel's misfortune, only the peace of mind that came with closing a dark chapter. I thought about telling Anna everything, giving her the details of Daniel's ruin as a kind of trophy, but something stopped me. She was healing, looking forward. Throwing his name back into her life, even to announce his defeat, seemed like a step backward. I decided to keep the information to myself, at least for now. Her peace was more important than any feeling of victory. Life went on. Anna started going out with her friends again. One Saturday afternoon, I heard her laughing loudly on the phone with a friend named Camilla. It was the first time I had heard her genuine, unrestrained laughter in months. That sound was the best news I could have received, more valuable than any report from Marco. It showed that the wound was finally becoming a scar, a painful memory, but one that no longer prevented her from living. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she came in, still smiling. "Dad, Camilla invited me to spend the weekend at her family's beach house. I think I'm going." Her eyes studied me, perhaps expecting some objection, some sign of overprotection on my part. I just smiled back. "That's great, sweetheart. Have a great time. You deserve it." The relief on her face was visible. In that moment, she didn't see a guardian, but a father who trusted her. And I realized that my biggest task now was no longer to protect her from the world, but to trust that I had raised her well enough to navigate it. A week later, however, the past knocked on our door in a way I hadn't expected. A letter arrived. The envelope was plain, white, with Anna's name handwritten on it. The sender was from a prison facility. My heart froze. I took the letter before she saw it. My first inclination was to burn it, to destroy any attempt by Daniel to reach my daughter. But then I looked up the stairs, imagining Anna in her room, living her life, regaining her strength. Destroying the letter would be treating her like the same fragile girl she was months ago. She wasn't that anymore. She had the right to know, to make her own decisions. With trembling hands, I went upstairs and knocked on her door. She was reading a book and looked up at me in surprise. I held out the letter to her. "This came for you. It's from him." She looked at the envelope, and for a moment I saw the fear return to her eyes. But then something changed. Her expression became firm. She took the letter from my my hand, her chin lifted. "Thank you for giving it to me, Dad." She didn't open it in front of me. She just put it on her nightstand. "I'll read it later," she said, with a calmness that impressed me. I left her room feeling a mixture of pride and anxiety. I had done the right thing, but the uncertainty of what those words might do to her was torturous. The next morning, I found Anna in the kitchen making coffee. She seemed thoughtful, but not sad. The letter was on the table, torn into small, neat pieces next to the trash can. She noticed my gaze. "It was what I expected," she said, handing me a cup. "A bunch of fake excuses, attempts to blame me, to say that you manipulated me against him. He wanted me to feel sorry for him, to maybe help him in some way." She shrugged, a slight, almost indifferent gesture. "In the past I might have cried. Maybe I would have even doubted myself. But now, I just feel sorry for him. What an empty life." She picked up the pieces of paper and threw them in the trash. A final and definitive act. "It's over, Dad. For real now." At that moment, I knew that my revenge had not been just to freeze an account or expose a liar. My real victory was right there in front of me. It was my daughter's strength, her ability to look at the darkness that hurt her, and instead of cowering, simply turn around and walk toward the light. She saved herself. I just turned on the light so she could find her way. And that, for a father, was everything. Family was everything, and mine was finally whole again. Watching my daughter throw those pieces of paper in the trash was like seeing the sun rise after the longest night of my life. That gesture, so simple and final, closed the chapter on Daniel forever. It wasn't my revenge that set her free, but the strength she found within herself. At that moment, I understood that my job as her protector had changed. I no longer needed to fight her battles, but rather to ensure that she had a safe place to return to, while she learned to fight for herself. Our home, which had once been a place of tension and secrets, began to breathe again. The silence that settled in was no longer heavy, but peaceful. It was a silence of healing. Months turned into a year. Routine settled like fine dust on the furniture, familiar and comforting. Anna blossomed in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. Her fierce dedication to work turned into passion. She was promoted, took on new responsibilities, and talked about her projects with a sparkle in her eyes that Daniel's name had never been able to ignite. She took up painting again, a hobby she had abandoned. On Sundays, the house was filled with the smell of oil paint instead of the shadow of bad memories. I watched from afar, with quiet pride. I was the gardener who saw his most precious plant, once trampled, grow strong and stretch its branches toward the sun. Our communication also changed. Conversations became lighter, about everyday life, about movies, about the painting she was working on. The elephant in the room, the trauma we had gone through, had finally left, never to return. One day during dinner, she told me some news with studied calm. "Dad, I met someone." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. I felt a chill in my stomach, an instant and irrational reaction of alertness. The ghost of Daniel, whom I thought was buried, stirred in his grave. I tried to keep my face neutral, but my heart was beating faster. "Really, daughter? That's great." My voice sounded more tense than I would have liked. She noticed, of course. Her eyes, now so perceptive, analyzed me for a second. "His name is Lucas," she continued. "We work in the same building. He's an architect. He's a good person, Dad. Calm, kind." She wasn't asking for my permission, she was informing me. And more than that, she was testing me, testing to see if I would trust her. I took a deep breath, forcing the muscles in my face to relax. "I'm happy for you, Anna. I really am." Over the next few days, I fought a silent battle within myself. Part of me, the logical part, knew that Anna was a mature, intelligent woman who had learned a terrible lesson. She was no longer the naive young girl Daniel had deceived. But the other part, the father who had seen his daughter broken, wanted to hire Marco again. I wanted to know everything about this Lucas guy, who his parents were, where he went to school, if he had any debts. The urge was almost irresistible. I picked up the phone one night, with Marco's number on the screen, but I couldn't bring myself to call. Doing so would betray the trust that Anna and I were so carefully rebuilding. It would be telling her, without words, that I didn't believe in her judgment. I deleted the number from the screen and felt as if I had passed a test. Protecting my daughter now meant taking a step back. It meant trusting her. Anna invited Lucas to dinner at our house the following Saturday. I spent the day anxious, tidying up the house as if expecting an inspection. When the doorbell rang, my heart skipped a beat. Anna answered, and I saw him for the first time. Lucas was a simple-looking young man with an open smile and a firm handshake. He didn't have Daniel's rehearsed charm. He didn't bring expensive wine or pay exaggerated compliments. He brought a dessert he bought at a small neighborhood bakery and asked me genuine questions about my work at the bank. During dinner, I watched his every gesture, every word. He listened attentively to Anna, laughed at her jokes, and looked at her with obvious respect. There was no blind adoration, but rather a quiet admiration. He spoke passionately about his work, but without arrogance. He spoke fondly of his family, ordinary people from another city. There was nothing out of place, no red flags. There was only normality. And for me, after all, normal was extraordinary. After Lucas left, Anna helped me tidy up the kitchen. We were silent for a while until she stopped drying a plate and turned to me. "So?" she asked, her voice a little fearful. I looked at her and, for the first time in a long time, I felt that peace was complete. There was no more fear, only relief. "He seems like a good guy, Anna." A huge smile lit up her face. It was the smile I had waited over a year to see again. "Thank you, Dad," she said. And I knew she wasn't just thanking me for the compliment about Lucas. She was thanking me for trusting her. "I've learned a lot," she continued, her voice more serious. "I know how to see people for who they really are now. I know the difference between pretty words and real actions. You don't have to worry anymore." That night, I understood that my revenge against Daniel had an effect I hadn't planned on. It not only protected my daughter from a monster, but it also forced her to grow up. The pain broke her, but she rebuilt herself stronger, like a bone that heals and becomes more resistant at the sight of the fracture. I had turned on the light so she could see the danger, and she used that light to learn to navigate the darkness on her own. My role had changed forever. I was no longer the shield, but the safe haven. The place she could return to if the storms of life were too strong, knowing she would find support, not control. Seeing her happy, confident, and with someone who treated her with the respect she deserved was the true conclusion of my revenge. Daniel's ruin was justice. Anna's happiness was my victory, and I didn't need anything else. The family was whole, not because I kept her locked up, but because I finally learned to open the door and trust that she would know how to fly. Anna's happiness was my victory, and for over a year I savored that peace like a man who crossed the desert and found an oasis. Her life with Lucas was everything I could have wished for my daughter. It was a relationship built on the solid foundation of respect and friendship, not on the shifting sands of empty promises. They talked about the future, about buying an apartment, about getting a dog. They were simple, normal plans, and for that very reason, wonderful. I was just a father again, not a guardian on high alert. Daniel's ghost had finally been exorcised from our home and our lives. I believed that chapter was closed, that justice and happiness had prevailed, but I was wrong. Life sometimes takes its toll on the decisions we make, even those we make with our hearts. The first wave of disruption came in the form of an official envelope on my desk at the bank. It was a notification of a routine internal audit, but with an attachment listing some transactions for further review. In the middle of the list was his name, Daniel, the frozen account. My heart skipped an uncomfortable beat. I had used my power as president of the bank to freeze that account, justifying it with a suspicion of illegal activity, which was true. But the catalyst for my action was personal, not professional. I had walked a fine line, and now someone was looking closely at that line. Initially, I wasn't worried. I had Marco's reports, the evidence, Julia's recorded confession. I could justify my actions if necessary, but the issue was not legality. It was ethics, and the bank's image. 2 weeks later, a man named Ricardo from the Banking Ethics Committee requested a meeting. He was a middle-aged man with an expression that revealed nothing, and a suit that looked like it was made for interrogations. He was polite, but direct. "Mr. Roberto, we are investigating an unusual procedure. The freezing of a customer's account, Daniel. The justification was based on suspicious activity, but the process was exceptionally quick and authorized directly by your office. Can you explain the urgency to me?" I remained calm, explaining that we had received a reliable anonymous tip, and that I had acted quickly to protect the bank's interests. It was a half-truth. The tip had come from my private investigator. Ricardo listened, took notes, and showed no reaction. "I see. And did you have any personal relationship with this client?" he asked casually. The question hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. "He was a client like any other," I lied, and the moment the lie left my mouth I felt a bitter taste. I was back in the same place, hiding the truth to protect my family. The pressure began to consume me. I would come home and see Anna and Lucas laughing in the kitchen, planning their weekend, and a cold fear would overcome me. The fear that my battle to save her could, in the end, end up splashing back on her. Her happiness was so new, so fragile, like a plant that had just sprouted. I couldn't let my storm drown her. I started having trouble sleeping. I tossed and turned in bed, thinking about Ricardo's words, about the possible outcomes. A public scandal, my career tarnished, my family's name dragged through the mud, all because I acted with the heart of a father instead of the head of a banker. The irony was cruel. The man I despised for his cynicism and lack of scruples had forced me to use methods that scratched my own integrity. The turning point came on a Friday night. Anna and Lucas invited us out to dinner to celebrate a major achievement of his at work. During dinner, amid the joy and light conversation, Lucas took Anna's hand. He looked at me, then at her, and with a slightly trembling voice but full of sincerity, he asked her to marry him. Anna cried with happiness, said yes, immediately, and the entire restaurant seemed to applaud. I smiled, hugged them both, and told them how happy I was for them, and I was. But behind my smile, panic was growing. My daughter was about to begin the happiest chapter of her life, and I was under investigation, with a sword hanging over my head. At that moment, I knew I could no longer carry that burden alone. My lie was not protecting her. It was only isolating me and dishonoring the trust we had rebuilt. The next day, I asked Anna and Lucas to come to my house. I sat them both down in my office, the same place where Anna had thanked me months ago. With a heavy heart, I told them everything. I told them about the audit, about the investigator Ricardo, about the lie I had told to protect myself in the bank. I told them about the fear I was feeling that everything would come to light and ruin their moment. When I finished, silence filled the room. Anna looked at me and there was no disappointment in her eyes, only deep understanding. "Dad," she said, taking my hand, "you did what you had to do to protect me. We're not going to let this ruin anything. We're going to face this together." Lucas agreed, placing his hand on Anna's. "Roberto, you acted like a father. Anyone would have done the same. We're with you." The relief I felt was so immense that it almost took my breath away. I was no longer alone. On Monday, I called Ricardo and asked for another meeting. This time, I was no longer on the defensive. I arrived with a folder containing all the evidence Marco had collected, the statements from other victims, the records of Daniel's fraud, the recording of the conversation with Julia. I put everything on the table. "Ricardo, I lied to you," I began. "I did have a personal relationship with Daniel. He was about to marry my daughter to defraud my family. I didn't act as president of the bank. I acted as a father desperate to protect his only daughter from a criminal. Did I abuse my power? Yes, and I'm ready to face the consequences, but I would do it all again." I handed him my letter of resignation as president. It was the right thing to do. My daughter Anna is in shock, thinking the bank made a mistake, while I protect her from it. What would you do in my place to protect those you love? Comment on what you think and share. The commission took weeks to deliberate. They were weeks of uncertainty, but not of fear. My family was united. Anna and Lucas postponed their big wedding plans, insisting that we resolve this first as a family. My resignation became public, justified by personal reasons. It was a blow to my pride, but a liberation for my soul. Finally, the decision came. Due to the extraordinary circumstances and the irrefutable evidence against Daniel, the committee decided not to take the case further to the authorities. However, my resignation was accepted, and I was fined for breach of protocol. I lost my position, the empire I had built, but as I watched Anna and Lucas hand in hand in the garden of our home, planning a simple and true wedding, I knew I had lost nothing. I had won. My revenge against Daniel was not just to expose him. It was the journey that followed, rebuilding trust with my daughter, accepting the consequences of my actions, and discovering that true wealth was not in my title or my bank account, but in the strength and unconditional love of my family. I turned the light on for my daughter, but in the process, she and Lucas showed me the way back to my own integrity, and that was the ultimate victory. Life without the title of president was quieter. The phones didn't ring constantly. My schedule wasn't a jigsaw puzzle of meetings, and the pressure that had once weighed on my shoulders was gone. In its place was a lightness I hadn't felt in decades. I spent my mornings tending to the garden, reading the books I had accumulated over the years, and, most importantly, actively participating in the preparations for Anna and Lucas's wedding. They were the picture of quiet happiness. They planned every detail with a partnership that filled me with pride, discussing flower colors and guest lists with the same seriousness with which they discussed the future. I watched them, my heart at peace, believing that the storm Daniel had passed forever, leaving behind only a clear sky and more fertile ground for our family to grow. My resignation had been the final price for that peace, and I paid it willingly. I was no longer the powerful banker. I was just Roberto, the bride's father, and that was the best job I ever had. This calm, however, was fragile. One afternoon, my personal phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello?" I said. On the other end of the line, a woman's voice, trembling and hurried, whispered my name. "Mr. Roberto, it's Julia, the woman who spoke to your investigator, Marco." My body tensed immediately. Her name brought back all the dirt from Daniel's past. "Julia, what happened? Are you okay?" I asked, instinctively lowering my voice. "No, I'm not okay," she replied, her voice choked with tears. "They found me. I don't know how, but they know I spoke. A man was here. He didn't hurt me, but he left a message. He said Daniel had partners and that they don't like loose ends. They said that I and anyone else who helped him ruin the business would pay." The blood ran cold in my veins. Anyone else who helped him? It was a message for me. My revenge had not been against a lone wolf, but against a member of a pack. And now, the pack was sniffing out my trail. That night, the peace of our home was shattered. I told Anna and Lucas everything. I saw the fear return to my daughter's eyes, the same shadow I had fought so hard to erase. Anger rose in my throat, an impotent rage at having brought danger back to our doorstep. "I'll take care of it," I said, with a firmness I didn't feel. "I'll call Marco. We'll sort it out." But Anna shook her head. taking my hand. Her eyes were steady, without tears. "No, Dad, you're not going to take care of this alone. Not anymore. We're going to take care of it. Together." Lucas, standing beside her, nodded seriously in agreement. "Roberto, you no longer have the bank to protect you, but you have us. We are a family. Julia's problem is our problem too." Their words struck me in an unexpected way. I, who had always been the shield, now saw my daughter and my future son-in-law standing beside me, not behind me. The dynamic had changed forever. I was no longer in charge, and for the first time it didn't scare me. I contacted Marco, who confirmed my worst fears. Daniel wasn't the mastermind behind the operation. He was just a pretty face, a tool used by much more dangerous people to infiltrate wealthy families. By exposing him, I had ruined a scheme worth a lot of money. Those men didn't want revenge. They wanted compensation. They believed that I somehow had access to the money Daniel had stolen and hidden. The following days were filled with silent tension. We reinforced the security of the house, but we lived looking over our shoulders. Any car parked on the street, any phone call from an unknown number put us on alert. The happiness of the wedding preparations was replaced by strategic conversations in hushed tones in the kitchen. It was Lucas who gave us a new direction. He, with his logical architect's mind, began to ask the right questions. "They want money, right? They think you know where it is. But what if we find it before they do?" The idea seemed crazy, but it was the only one we had. We dove back into the reports Marco had prepared a year earlier, looking for any details we might have missed. Anna remembered fragmented conversations with Daniel about safe investments in real estate, something she had ignored at the time. Lucas took these fragments and began researching construction projects in the region that fit the descriptions. We spent sleepless nights cross-referencing information, dates, and names of front companies. It was like putting together a puzzle in the dark. The final piece came from Anna. She remembered a name that Daniel had once mentioned, laughing, as if it were an inside joke. Golden Residence. She thought it was the name of a movie or a book. But when Lucas typed that name into a business registry, everything fell into place. It was a front company linked to one of the partners Marco had identified. The money wasn't in an account. It was in bricks and mortar. It was invested in a luxury apartment building in the city center. We had the information the criminals wanted, the weapon they thought was in our hands. For a moment, I thought about using it to negotiate, to buy our peace. But looking at Anna and Lucas working together so determined and courageous made me realize that this was not the way. Giving in to fear would only make us hostages forever. The solution was not to put out the fire, it was to expose the arsonist to the light of day. Using the old and discreet contacts I had left, we prepared an anonymous dossier. In it, we put everything: Marco's evidence, the location of the investment, the names of the partners, and Julia's story as proof of coercion. We didn't hand it over to the local police, where corruption could have stifled the case. Marco used an intermediary to take the package directly to a nationally renowned investigative journalist known for not being afraid to take down powerful people. And then we waited. The wait was the hardest part. Each passing day was a test of nerves, but something was different this time. I wasn't alone in my office, moving pieces on a chessboard of power. I was in the living room, playing cards with my daughter and her fiancé, finding normality amid the chaos. We supported each other, gave each other strength. The story broke on a Sunday morning, on the front page of the country's most widely circulated newspaper. The scandal was immediate. Tax authorities and police were forced to act under the media spotlight. Arrests began that same afternoon. We saw the faces of Daniel's partners on television, handcuffed, their empires of lies crumbling in real time. The threat to us vanished like smoke in the wind. Weeks later, Anna and Lucas were married in the garden of their home. It was a simple ceremony, filled with friends and family. There was none of the luxury that Daniel would have demanded, but there was something infinitely more valuable: truth. As I watched Anna with her radiant smile dancing with Lucas, a man whose only wealth was his character, I understood the true nature of my victory. My first revenge, that of the banker, was an act of power and control that almost cost me my career and my peace of mind. But the second revenge, that of the father and father-in-law, was different. It was an act of trust and collaboration. I no longer needed to be the shield that protected her from the world. Instead, we became a fortress supporting each other. Daniel's ruin was justice. The security of our family achieved together was the real victory. I lost an empire, but I gained my family back, stronger and more united than ever. And standing there in that garden, I was the richest man in the world. The months following the wedding were like a long, peaceful dawn. Life, once a race full of noise and urgency, now had the gentle rhythm of the seasons in my garden. I learned the names of flowers, the right time to prune branches, and the patience to wait for a seed to sprout. Anna and Lucas built their life together with a serene joy that was my greatest comfort. They came for lunch on weekends, filling the house with laughter and plans for the future. Lucas became the son I never had, a good and steadfast man businessman whose love for Anna was visible in every gesture. I had traded the presidency of a bank for a gardening apron, and I had never felt so rich. Daniel's story seemed like a distant nightmare, a fever that had passed, leaving only the lesson that true strength lies not in high walls, but in strong bonds. That peace, however, was interrupted by an envelope. It arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning, a brown envelope with no return address, just my name and address written by hand. Inside was a safe deposit box key and a note with a single sentence. He said that if anything happened, this should go to you. He thought you would know what to do. There was no signature. My heart raced. He could only be one person, Daniel. From somewhere in his web of lies, one last loose thread had just arrived at my door. I showed it to Anna and Lucas that same night. The color drained from my daughter's face when she saw the key. It was as if a ghost had sat down at the table with us. Lucas picked up the key, examining it. This could be a trap, he said, his voice serious. It could be from his partners who weren't arrested. It was a real possibility, a fear that chilled me to the bone. We spent days debating what to do. Ignore it? Hand it over to the police? Curiosity and the feeling that this was an unfinished chapter consumed us. In the end, it was Anna who made the decision. We need to know, she said, her voice firm. We can't live with this shadow haunting us, but we'll do it together, and carefully. We hired Marco once again. He discovered that the key belonged to a safe deposit box in a small private bank in a neighboring town, rented under a false name. Marco did a thorough check and assured us that there was no surveillance at the location. Apparently, it was a secret that belonged only to Daniel. The three of us went together. Me, Anna, and Lucas. When we opened the heavy metal door, we found no documents or threats. We found money. A lot of money. There were bundles and bundles of bills, along with some jewelry and expensive watches. And on top of it all, a notebook. While Lucas and I stared at the fortune in amazement, Anna picked up the notebook. She leafed through it silently for a few minutes, her face growing paler and paler. Finally, she looked at us, her eyes filled with deep sadness. It's a list, she whispered. A list of all the people he cheated. The names, the amounts he took from each of them, notes about their families, their weaknesses. Daniel wasn't just a con artist, he was a scholar of other people's pain. That notebook was his trophy, proof of his cruel victories, and the money in the safe was the result. Old Roberto, the banker, would have seen an opportunity there, a problem to be managed, but the man I had become saw something else. I saw the faces behind those names. I saw Julia and so many others like her. The decision was unanimous and instantaneous. That money wasn't ours. It was poison that needed to be returned, a mistake we needed to try to fix. This was no longer a matter of revenge, but of justice, a justice that the legal system might never achieve. We returned home and, with Marco's help, began the most complex task of our lives, finding every person on that list and returning what had been stolen from them. It was a silent operation, carried out in the shadows. Marco located the families, many of whom had lost everything and lived in shame because of the scam they had suffered. We prepared anonymous packages with the exact amount of money Daniel had stolen and a simple note. This is an attempt to correct a great mistake. May you find peace. Each delivery was a mixture of fear and relief. We left the packages in mailboxes, at the doors of humble homes, or sent them through intermediaries. We wanted no gratitude or recognition. We just wanted to clean up the stain Daniel had left, not only in our lives, but in the lives of so many others. We saw an elderly couple crying on their porch from afar when they found an envelope. We learned from Marco that a small family business, which was about to close, managed to get back on its feet. Those small acts of reparation healed a wound inside me that I didn't even know was still open. My first revenge against Daniel was an act of power, cold and calculating. But this second journey, this act of giving back, was something much greater. It was an act of humanity. When the last package was delivered, a different kind of silence settled in our home. It was not the silence of peace, but of completion. The cycle was finally closed. A few weeks later, I received a letter from prison. It was from Daniel. Someone, perhaps one of the victims who received the money, must have made noise, and the story somehow reached him. The letter was full of hatred. He called me a fool, said I had thrown away a fortune. He didn't understand. He would never understand. He wrote, "You took everything from me, my future, my freedom, and now even my past. I hope you rot with your honor." I read the letter, and for the first time, I didn't feel angry at him. I felt sorry for him. He was imprisoned not only by concrete walls, but by his own greed, unable to see that true wealth cannot be kept in a safe. I crumpled the paper and threw it into the fire in the fireplace. As the flames consumed his words of hatred, I looked at Anna and Lucas, who were preparing dinner in the kitchen, laughing at some silly joke. At that moment, I understood the ultimate truth of my journey. Revenge is not a dish best served cold. True revenge is living a life so full and loving that the person who hurt you becomes irrelevant. Daniel was no longer a storm in our lives. He was just a distant memory, the ashes of a letter burning in the fireplace. I lost my empire, my title, my power, but there, in that simple house, surrounded by the unwavering love of my family, and with a clear conscience, I was not just a rich man. I was a man at peace, and that was a fortune that no con artist could ever take away from me. 2 years passed. The dust from that storm had settled completely, and in its place life life blossomed in a way I never thought possible. My world, which was once measured in financial statements and board meetings, was now measured by the cycles of my garden. I knew the morning sun that touched the rose bushes I planted with Anna, and the afternoon shade where Lucas liked to read. The biggest news came in the spring. I was going to be a grandfather. The joy I felt was something pure, a wealth that cannot be deposited in any bank. Anna was radiant, and Lucas treated her like the most precious thing in the world. We were a family, not by contract or convenience, but by a bond forged in adversity and strengthened by love. The story of Daniel, the safe, the returned money, it all seemed to belong to another life, to another man I barely recognized. The peace was real, palpable, like the damp earth in my hands. That peace was shattered one Saturday afternoon. I was pruning a bush when I saw a woman standing at my gate. She was a simple-looking lady with neatly combed gray hair and a tired but determined look. She didn't seem lost. She seemed to have a purpose. I walked up to her, drying my hands on my apron. "Yes?" I asked with a friendly smile. She looked me up and down, and her eyes fixed on my face. "Are you Roberto?" she asked, her voice firm but with a slight tremor. I confirmed. "My name is Helena," she said, and then uttered the words that made the ground disappear beneath my feet for the second time in my life. "I'm Daniel's mother." The air grew heavy. The sound of birds, the warmth of the sun, everything seemed to disappear. I stood there, staring at the woman whose son had almost destroyed my family. She didn't seem angry, just immensely sad. "I didn't come here to cause trouble," she continued, as if reading my mind. I just need to understand. My son is in prison. His life is over. Everyone says he was a monster, a con artist, but I raised him. He was a good boy. Someone corrupted him. Someone used him. I need to know who. I need to know the truth." That night, tension returned to our home. I told Anna and Lucas about Helena's visit. Anna's face turned pale, her hand instinctively going to her belly, as if to protect the baby from a ghost. Lucas was silent for a long moment, his face serious and thoughtful. "This is dangerous, Roberto," he said finally. "She may not be a threat, but if she starts asking questions, digging up the past, she may attract the attention of people who have forgotten us. Daniel's partners who weren't arrested, for example. We should talk to Marco." His logic was impeccable. It was what old Roberto would have done, but I was no longer that man. The idea of going back to using investigators, secrets, and maneuvers in the shadows left a bitter taste in my mouth. "And what will we tell her?" I asked. "That her son was exactly the monster everyone says he was? That he did it all out of greed? How do you say that to a mother?" Anna, who had been quiet until then, looked at me. "She has a right to know the truth, Dad, no matter how horrible it is." Helena was persistent. In the days that followed, I saw her in the small shopping center in our area, talking to people, showing them an old photo of Daniel. She wasn't aggressive. She was just a mother looking for answers, and people, sensing her pain, talked to her. She was creating a trail, an echo of the past that threatened our peace of mind. Lucas was right. The risk was real. One night I got a call from Marco. He didn't have to say much. "She's drawing attention, Roberto. I heard that an old contact, someone connected to Daniel's partners, has been asking questions about a woman investigating the case." Ice ran through my veins again. The peace I had built was fragile, a thin layer of glass over an abyss. I had two options: use my old power to silence Helena, to make her disappear and protect my family at any cost, or face it head-on with the truth I had chosen as my new foundation. I looked at the room where Anna and Lucas were setting up the crib, their laughter echoing through the house. The choice was clear. The next day, I called Helena and invited her to my house. She arrived hesitant, suspicious. I took her to my office, the same place where I had planned my first revenge. Anna and Lucas were in the living room, a silent support. I asked Helena to sit down and placed a small wooden box on the table between us. "I know you love your son," I began, my voice calm, "and I know that nothing I say will change the pain you feel. But you asked for the truth, and it's here." I opened the box and took out Daniel's notebook, the notebook that contained the list of his victims, his cruel methods. I slid it across the table to her. "This is your son's handwriting," I said softly. "Read it. Read what he wrote himself." She took the notebook with trembling hands. Her eyes scanned the first page, then the second. I saw the exact moment when the denial on her face began to crack. She read the names, the amounts, the cold notes about each family's weaknesses. She saw Julia's name. She saw Anna's name. Silent tears began to roll down her face, falling onto the pages. She didn't sob. It was a silent cry, the pain of a mother who finally saw the son she didn't know. She stayed there for almost an hour, reading every word. When she closed the notebook, she looked 10 years older. "He did this," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "He really did all this." There was no hatred in her voice, just deep desolation. I felt no triumph, only immense sadness for her, for us, for all the lives Daniel had broken. "Why show me this?" she asked, looking up at me. "To hurt me?" "No," I replied sincerely. "To give you the only thing I could, the truth, so you can stop searching, so you can find your own peace." She nodded slowly, stood up, and walked to the door. Before leaving, she turned around. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "I think, in a strange way, you've set me free." And then she was gone. I never saw her again. The silent threat disappeared with her. That night, sitting in the garden with Anna and Lucas under a starry sky, I understood. Revenge is not an act. fact. It is a process of healing, and true healing does not come from punishing those who have hurt us, but from repairing what has been broken, inside and outside of us. By giving that mother the truth, I had closed the last chapter, not with power, but with compassion. And looking at my daughter, at the future growing inside her, I knew that the legacy I would leave would not be money or empires, but integrity. And that, finally, was a peace that no one could ever take away from me. Peace, I discovered, is not a final destination, but a garden that needs to be tended every day, and mine was blooming. The months that followed Helena's departure were the most peaceful of my life. I watched Anna's belly grow, a small daily miracle that redefined my whole world. Lucas was the rock she needed, and that I secretly needed too. He tended the garden with me, and our conversations were no longer about crises or threats, but about baby names and the color of the room we were painting. That silence that had once frightened me was now filled with the sound of laughter, with plans for a future that, for the first time, seemed bright and clear. Daniel's story became exactly what it should be, a scar, a reminder of a battle won that made us stronger, more united. I had left behind the cold banker, the strategist. Now I was just Roberto, father, and soon, grandfather. That was my identity, and I protected it with the same determination with which I once protected my fortune. This new tranquility began to show small, almost invisible cracks. It started with a car, a dark sedan, which I saw parked at the end of our street. At first, I didn't think much of it. Our town was small, but it wasn't a desert. Then I saw the same car near the market where Anna did her shopping. And once, Lucas mentioned that a strange man was watching him from across the street, near his work. Putting the pieces together, I felt a familiar chill, an echo of the past that I thought I had buried. It wasn't paranoia, it was instinct, honed by years of dangerous negotiations and corporate rivalries. Someone was watching us. My first reaction was to pick up the phone and call Marco, but I stopped myself. Turning to him would be like admitting defeat, like going back to being the man who solved problems with power and secrets. I needed to protect my family, but I wanted to do it as the new Roberto, not the old one. The wait for our invisible observer's next move was not long. One afternoon, while I was watering the flowers, a man stopped at the gate. He was tall, thin, with a smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. He wore a suit that seemed too expensive for our quiet neighborhood. "Roberto?" he asked, his voice soft, almost friendly. I nodded, putting the watering can on the ground. "My name is Ricardo. I was a partner of Daniel's." The name fell like a stone in the silence of the garden. Ricardo opened the gate and entered without being invited. "I heard an interesting story in prison," he continued, looking around at my simple house, at my dirt-stained hands. "A story about a safe, a lot of money, and a father-in-law who decided to play vigilante. It's a good story, but I think the ending is wrong. Where's the rest, Roberto?" Daniel was smart. He would never keep everything in one place. I remained calm, my heart pounding against my ribs. "There is no rest. What we found was returned to its rightful owner." Ricardo laughed, a dry, joyless sound. "Noble of you, but I don't believe in nobility. I believe in business, and Daniel owed me, which means that now you owe me. I'll give you a week to find my money." He turned and left, leaving behind a trail of fear that poisoned the air in my garden. That night, the peace in our home was shattered. I told Anna and Lucas about Ricardo's visit. I saw the terror in my daughter's eyes, and her hand went straight to her belly, a protective gesture that broke my heart. Lucas was furious. "Let's call the police, Dad. This man is threatening you." I shook my head. "The police can't do anything." He didn't make a direct threat. He was careful. Men like Ricardo know how to play the game. They live in the shadows where the law can't reach them. Despair began to take hold of us. Old Roberto would have crushed Ricardo without a second thought, but I was no longer that man. I no longer had an army of lawyers and contacts. "So what are we going to do?" Anna whispered, her voice trembling. I looked at the two of them, at the family that was my only treasure, and made a decision. We're going to do what we should have always done. We're going to fight with the truth. I spent the next 2 days in my office, not planning revenge, but preparing a defense. I gathered all the records we had, the list from Daniel's notebook, the receipts for the anonymous transfers Marco helped us make, the newspaper articles Marco found about some of the families who recovered after receiving the money. I prepared a folder, not with secrets and blackmail, but with facts. It was all I had. On the third day, I called Ricardo and invited him to a meeting, not in a dark secret place, but in a busy coffee shop in the city center. I wanted daylight on my side. He arrived on time, the same fake smile on his face. He sat down and said, "I hope you have good news for me." I didn't answer. I just pushed the folder across the table toward him. "This is all I have for you," I said. He opened the folder dismissively, but as he leafed through the documents, his expression changed. The smile disappeared, replaced by a frown of confusion and then disbelief. He saw the list of names. He saw the exact amounts. He saw the proof that every penny had been returned. He spent almost half an hour in silence, analyzing each paper, looking for a flaw, a lie. Finally, he closed the folder and stared at me. His eyes narrowed. "You're an idiot," he said, but without the conviction of before. "It was a fortune, then you threw it all away. I didn't throw it away, I replied firmly. I returned it. It was dirty money, Ricardo, poison, and I cleaned my house of it. He stared at me for a long time as if trying to understand a foreign language. He, like Daniel, lived in a world where greed was the only law and compassion was a weakness. My attitude made no sense to him. Are you telling me there's nothing, absolutely nothing? He asked. Nothing, I confirmed. The hunt is over. There is no treasure at the end. He leaned back in his chair, defeated not by a greater force but by the simple, stubborn truth. He got up, left his briefcase on the table, and walked out of the coffee shop without saying another word. I watched him leave, a ghost from the past dissolving into the crowd. When I returned home, I found Anna and Lucas waiting for me on the porch. They didn't need to ask. They could see in my face that the storm had passed. We hugged, a tight hug of relief and victory, a victory unlike any I had ever had before. It was not won with power or money, but with integrity. That night, as we watched the stars from our garden, I finally understood. Peace is not the absence of problems. It is the courage to face them in the right way, together. Months later, in the spring, our little grandson was born. Holding him in our arms was true wealth, a true empire. His cry was the most beautiful music in the world, the sound of a new beginning, of a blank page. The shadow of Daniel and Ricardo had completely disappeared, consumed by the light of that new life. I had gone through 2 acts of revenge, one cold and calculating, the other based on justice and reparation. But the real victory was not defeating my enemies. It was becoming the man my family deserved, a man at peace, not because the world around him was perfect, but because his heart was finally in order, and that was a fortune that no one could ever threaten again. My revenge against Daniel began by freezing his account. What did you think of my plan to protect my daughter Anna? Subscribe for more intense stories of family and betrayal.